Tonight, we turn toward one of the oldest questions there is. Who are you, really? Beneath the name, the role, the history, the worry, the person you have been trying so hard to hold together, there is something simpler, something older than the story of your life that has been there since before you can remember. It is still here, even now, beneath everything. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The Buddhist teachings point us again and again toward this remembering. It is not about becoming someone new, or fixing the self, or forcing the mind into peace. It is about seeing through the small, separate self we so often mistake for who we are. Most of us live as though everything rests on our shoulders. We carry old fears, old identities, old ways of protecting ourselves. And after a while, the weight begins to feel like us. But it is not us. Tonight, through stories and teachings from Buddhism and Zen, we will explore what it means to set that weight down and to remember the deeper belonging that has been here all along. There is nothing you need to do, nothing to understand perfectly, and nothing to hold on to. Just rest and listen, and let the words bring you back to what was never truly lost. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk. Let us begin. There is a story told about the Buddha soon after his great awakening beneath the Bodhi tree. He was walking along a quiet road when a traveler came toward him from the other direction. The traveler stopped. He looked closely at the Buddha's face. He could not quite say what he was seeing. The Buddha was simply a man in a robe, walking under the morning sun. And yet there was a stillness in him that the traveler had never seen in another person. The traveler asked, "Are you a god?" The Buddha said, "No." "Are you some kind of magician then? A wizard?" "No." "Are you a man?" "No." The traveler was puzzled. He scratched his head. "Then what are you?" The Buddha smiled gently, and he said, "I am awake." The traveler walked on, and he carried that answer with him for a long time. He had met a man who was not asleep inside his own life, not lost in what had happened, not lost in what might come, not caught in the endless work of defending and arranging a self. Simply here, simply awake to what he already was. Let us begin with a story about how heavy it becomes when we forget. There was once a man who carried a great pack on his back wherever he went. It was an enormous thing, taller than he was, stuffed full and bound with rope, and he had been carrying it for so many years that he no longer remembered a time without it. It held everything he owned, and everything he thought he might one day need, and many things he had simply never been able to leave behind. It had grown heavier year by year, for he was always adding to it and never taking anything out. He guarded it day and night. He never set it down, not even to rest, because somewhere along the way, he had come to believe that the pack was who he was. One day, bent low under the weight, he came to a river. An old ferryman sat by the water, ready to carry travelers across. The man asked to be taken to the other side. The ferryman looked at him and at the great pack rising high over his head and said, "Of course. But the river runs fast today, and the boat is small. A man cannot stand in it bent under a load as tall as that. You would tip us both into the water. Take the pack off your back, set it down in the bottom of the boat, and sit low beside it. Then we can cross safely." The man clutched the ropes and shook his head. "No, I never set it down. Not for anyone. Everything I have is in here. The ferryman only smiled and held the boat steady. I am not asking you to leave it behind, he said. It will be right here, beside you, the whole way across. I am only asking you to stop carrying it on your shoulders for the length of one short crossing, so that we do not capsize. The man was very tired, and the river was wide. So at last, slowly, he loosened the ropes and let the great pack slide from his shoulders into the bottom of the boat. His back straightened a little. He felt the cool air on his chest. He had carried the weight for so long that he had stopped noticing it, and only now, in its absence, did he feel how heavy it had truly been. He looked around as if waking from a long sleep. He saw the water moving, and the light lying across it, and the far green bank drawing closer, and he understood that he had not really looked at anything in years. He had been too busy guarding the pack. When the boat reached the other side, the man bent down to take up his load again, out of old habit. But his hands were slow. He looked at the pack for a long moment, and he understood that he had only ever believed he was the weight he carried. Underneath it, all along, he had been the one who could set it down. Like the man with his pack, we forget. We forget that the heavy, separate self we carry everywhere is not who we are. We forget that we can set it down. Most of us live inside this forgetting, and we do not even know it. Here is how the forgetting works. We come to believe that we are alone in here. A single small self, sealed inside one body, looking out at a world that is separate from us and often against us. From inside that belief, life becomes a long struggle to keep ourselves safe and to get what we need before it runs out. Sometimes we live this as a kind of victim. We feel that life is happening to us. There are forces all around, other people, bad luck, our own history, and we are small in the middle of it, just trying to survive. Everything is pushing on us, and we are pushing back, and we are tired. And sometimes we live it the other way. We tell ourselves that we are the author of everything, that we create our own reality, that we are fully responsible for our happiness and our success and even our health. This version sounds better and feels stronger, and there is something true in it, because the mind is powerful and how we meet our life matters a great deal. But look closely, and the two reveal themselves as the same person underneath. Both of them have a heavy, separate self standing right at the center. In one, that self is a victim. In the other, that self is in charge. Either way, the person is still alone in there, holding the whole weight of a life by himself. And that, the Buddha taught, is the deepest cause of our suffering. Not our circumstances, the lonely sense that we are separate and that it is all on us. Zen and the older Buddhist teachings have looked very carefully at this for thousands of years, and they all point somewhere else. They point away from the separate self entirely. In the old wisdom cultures, awakening was never something one person achieved alone, like winning a prize. It was understood as something that opens for the benefit of everyone. A person would practice and settle and open the heart, not to become special, but because when one heart opens, the warmth of it spreads. We are not separate drops. We are part of one water. There is a beautiful idea at the heart of this path. The word is bodhisattva. It comes from two older words. Bodhi means awakening. Sattva means being. So a bodhisattva is an awakening being. And the bodhisattva does not wake up in order to free himself and then walk away, finished, while everyone else is left behind. The Bodhisattva wakes up for the sake of all beings. It is not a race to some finish line where one person crosses first and the rest are still running. We are in this together. One person's freedom and another's are not separate things. When a heart opens, the world is a little warmer for everyone in it. We are strands in one web, and a movement in any strand is felt across the whole. This is a very different way to hold a life. We are not single selves, each struggling alone towards some private salvation. We belong to something, and the moments of that belonging, those open and unworried moments, are not lucky accidents. They are glimpses of the truth. There is a well-known Zen tale that captures this, told for centuries. It is a story about how easily we miss what is right in front of us. There was once a young monk who had traveled a great distance to study under a teacher known across the region for his wisdom. The young man had read a great deal. He had practiced for years on his own. He arrived at the monastery quite proud of all he knew and quite sure that he had come to be filled with something he did not yet have. The teacher welcomed him warmly and invited him to sit for tea. The young monk began at once. He spoke of the texts he had studied. He spoke of his insights, his understanding, the long hours he had spent in meditation. He explained what he had grasped about the nature of the mind and what he still hoped to learn here, from a master at last. The teacher listened and nodded and began to pour the tea. He filled the young man's cup, and then he kept pouring. The tea rose to the rim, and then it spilled over, running across the table and onto the floor. The young monk jumped up. "Stop. The cup is full. It cannot hold any more." The teacher set down the pot and looked at him kindly. "You are like this cup," he said. "You have come to me already full. You are full of your reading, full of your ideas, full of your sense of yourself as a student who must be taught. How can I show you anything while you are so full? Come back when your cup is empty." The young monk sat with that for a long while, and slowly he began to understand. He had come believing he was missing something he had to travel far to find and pour into himself. But nothing was missing. He had simply arrived so full, so crowded with all he knew and all he took himself to be, that nothing else could reach him. What he needed was not more. It was less. He had to empty the cup before it could hold a single drop. There is a Zen saying that points at the same thing. We are like a wave that has forgotten it is the ocean. A wave rises up out of the sea. For a little while, it has a shape and a size. It is taller than the wave beside it, or smaller. It moves faster or slower. And if a wave could think, it might spend its whole short life worried about these things. It might feel proud of its height, or afraid of the shore coming closer, or lonely, certain it is just one small wave among millions, rising and falling all alone. But the wave was never separate from the water, not for a single moment. It was always the ocean, taking a shape for a while. Its rising and its falling were both just the sea, moving. There was never anything to fear, and never anything to lose, because the wave was always the thing it was afraid of being parted from. This is close to what the Buddha meant. We feel like separate waves. We spend so much of our energy on the size and shape of our own small life, comparing, defending, afraid of the shore. And underneath it all, we are the water. We always were. So how do we begin to remember in an ordinary day, in the middle of an ordinary life? It begins gently. There is nothing to force and nothing new to believe. There is only noticing. The next time one of those open moments arrives, the kind we spoke of, the practice is simply to notice it. To notice that the worried self has grown quiet. To notice how it feels in the body when nothing is being defended. There is usually a softening in the chest. The breath comes more easily. The world seems a little closer, a little kinder. There is no need to grab the feeling or hold on to it. That would only be the small self again, trying to possess something. It is enough to recognize it. A small inward yes. This is closer to who I really am. And when the other state comes, tight and separate and alone with it all, there is no need to fight that either. It helps only to remember that it is not the whole truth. It is the forgetting, and the remembering is always near, as close as the next quiet breath. That is enough for now. We are only beginning. Tonight we will walk slowly through the ways a person comes home to this, the ways the heart opens even when life is hard. There is no hurry. There is nowhere to get to. We already belong to the thing we are looking for. Let us be still for a moment before we go further. Notice how you are feeling, with no need to change a thing. We will continue whenever it feels right. When a person lives behind that small and separate sense of self, there is always something underneath it. Beneath the worry, beneath the hurry, beneath the constant managing of a life, there is fear. It is the shadow the separate self casts. The smaller and more walled off we feel, the longer that shadow grows. The Buddha spoke of this directly. From attachment springs grief, he taught, and from attachment springs fear. We hold tight to something, and in the same moment, we begin to dread its loss. The clenched hand and the frightened heart are one gesture. Most of us do not notice the fear because it has been with us so long that it simply feels like the weather of being alive. We feel it as restlessness. We feel it as the need to check, to control, to prepare for whatever might go wrong. We feel it as the tightness that comes when someone disagrees with us, or when our plans slip, or when we lie awake at the end of a long day going over things. We give these other names. But underneath, very often, it is fear. And there is a kindness in seeing this clearly. The fear is not a flaw. It is not a sign that anything has gone wrong with us. It is simply what happens when a wave believes it is only a wave, cut off from the sea. Consider a small child who has wandered away from the people who love her and finds herself alone in a crowd. Everything that a moment ago was warm and familiar has become large and strange. She does not yet understand that she has only walked a little way off, that her family is close, that she is held within something that has not abandoned her. All she knows is that she is small and alone and surrounded. So she is afraid. That is very close to how the separate self lives. It feels small in a vast world. It feels alone, even in a crowd. It does not remember that it belongs to anything, so it must defend itself at every turn. And from that single misunderstanding, an enormous amount of our suffering flows. The Buddha looked at this with great tenderness. He did not scold people for their fear. He saw that a frightened being acts out of its fright, and that beneath nearly every unkind or grasping or anxious act, there is something afraid. The person who lashes out is protecting a wound. The person who clings too tightly is afraid of being left. The person who must always be right is afraid of being shown to be small. Once we see this, the people around us begin to look different too. The difficult co-worker, the sharp-tongued relative, the stranger who cuts in line, each of them is, in some hidden corner, a frightened child who has forgotten that they belong. This does not excuse the harm that fear can cause, but it softens our heart toward the one who caused it and toward ourselves when we are the one. When we begin to see our own fear this way, something eases. We stop treating it as an enemy to be conquered, and we begin to treat it as we might treat that frightened child, with patience and with care. There is an old understanding in Zen that what we resist tends to grow stronger, and what we meet with a kind and open awareness begins, on its own, to settle. Fear is no different. Turned away from, it follows us like a shadow. Turned toward gently, it loosens. There is an old story about an anxious woman told in a time long before our own. In a small village, there lived a woman who wept nearly every day, and her neighbors, with gentle affection, had come to call her the weeping woman. She had 2 grown sons whom she loved more than anything in the world, and both had made their way in trades of their own. The elder son sold umbrellas in the market. The younger son was a potter, and he laid his bowls and jars out in the open air to dry and harden in the sun. A mother with 2 grown sons, each with an honest living, might be expected to rest easy. But her love had turned entirely into worry, and her worry found something to grieve over in every kind of weather. When the sun shone bright and warm, she wept for her elder son. "Look at this clear sky," she would say. "Not a cloud anywhere. Who will buy an umbrella on a day like this? My poor boy will sell nothing, and his shop will fail." And when the rains came, she wept just as hard for her younger son. "All this rain," she would cry. "His pots will never dry in such damp. The clay will stay soft, his work will be ruined, and he will be left with nothing." So whether the day was wet or dry, she found her reason to sorrow, and she lived in a kind of perpetual rain of her own making, no matter what the sky was doing. One day a wandering monk passed through the village and saw her sitting in her doorway, weeping again. He stopped and asked her kindly what troubled her so, and she told him the whole story, the umbrellas and the pots, the sun and the rain, and how there was never a single day she could be at peace. The monk listened, and when she had finished, he smiled, not unkindly, and said, "I see your trouble, but it is not in the weather. It is in which sun you choose to think of. You have it turned exactly the wrong way around." She looked up at him, not understanding. "From this day," he said, "when the sun shines warm and bright, do not think of your elder son and his umbrellas. Think of your younger son. Picture his pots and jars drying beautifully in that good strong sunlight, hardening fast, ready for market. Rejoice for him, and when the rain falls, do not grieve for the potter. Think instead of your elder son in the market and all the people hurrying to buy his umbrellas in the downpour. On rainy days his shop will overflow with custom. The very same sky that you have been weeping under is a blessing for one of your sons every single day. There is not one day in the year that is bad for both of them. You have simply been looking at the wrong child each time. The woman sat very still, and then she began to laugh. Nothing about the weather had changed. The sun and the rain were exactly as they had always been. The only thing that changed was where she turned her mind. And from that day, the neighbors stopped calling her the weeping woman, because on sunny days and rainy days alike, she was found smiling in her doorway, thinking of whichever son the heavens were blessing that day. The story makes a simple point. Her suffering was never caused by the sun or the rain. It was caused entirely by the thought she chose to hold. The same sky that had been a source of endless grief became, with no change at all but a turning of the mind, a source of daily gladness. So much of our fear is like this. We stand beneath a sky that holds as much blessing as threat, and we fix our gaze, out of long habit, only on what might go wrong. When we look closely at our own fear, we find that it lives almost entirely in two places, and neither of them is here. The first is the past. We carry old hurts, old failures, old moments when we were small and someone was unkind, and the frightened self keeps them close, scanning the present for any sign that the same thing is about to happen again. The second is the future, that endless hall of doors, behind each of which the mind paints something that might go wrong. We spend hours there. We rehearse conversations that may never happen. We suffer losses that have not occurred and very often never will. But the fear cannot survive in the present moment itself. This is one of the great discoveries of meditation, and it is why the Buddha pointed again and again to this moment, the one happening now. Right now, in this breath, in this room, there is most likely no danger at all. The roof is holding. The ground is steady. Whatever is coming has not yet come, and whatever has passed is no longer here. There is a deep and simple relief in that recognition, and it is always near. So many of our worst hours are spent suffering over things that never come to pass at all. The illness that never developed, the disaster that never struck, the conversation that went nothing like the catastrophe we rehearsed. The losses that do eventually come in a life are real, and they bring real grief. But the long suffering we pile up in advance, bracing and dreading and imagining, changes nothing for the better. This is the strange arithmetic of worry. It feels like preparation, and it produces only exhaustion. There is a teaching story that shows this in a single gesture. A teacher of meditation was speaking with a student who was eaten alive by worry, a young man who could not rest for the weight of all he carried. As they spoke, the teacher bent down, picked up a smooth stone from the ground, and held it out in her open palm at arm's length. "How heavy is this stone?" she asked. The student guessed at its weight, a small thing, no more than a few ounces. "Whether it is light or heavy is not the question," she said. "The question is, how long I hold it out like this. If I hold it for a moment, it is nothing. If I hold it for an hour, my arm begins to ache. If I hold it from sunrise to sunset, my arm will go numb, and this little stone will feel as heavy as a boulder. The stone has not changed at all. Only the holding has." She lowered her hand and let the stone rest in her lap. "Your worries are like this stone," she told him. "Pick one up for a moment, look at it honestly, and it does you no harm. But carry it all day and all night. Take it up again the instant you wake, and it will wear you to nothing. And the holding changes nothing out in the world. The stone weighs just the same whether it sits in my lap or strains my arm. So set your worries down when their moment has passed. They will wait for you if ever you truly need them again." The young man understood. He had believed that to stop worrying was to be careless, to drop his guard against all the things that might come. But the worrying itself accomplished nothing. The stone was no lighter for being held aloft all day. It was only heavier in his hand, and he was only more tired and less able to meet whatever might actually arrive. There is an old image from the Buddhist teachings that captures the heart of this. A man is walking at dusk along a mountain path, and he sees a snake coiled in the road ahead. He stops at once, his heart beating fast. He dares not step forward, and he stands there on the path, held still by his fear, for a long while. Then the moon rises a little higher, and its light falls on the path. And he sees that it was never a snake at all. It is a coil of old rope, dropped by some traveler long ago. The moment he sees clearly, the fear simply dissolves. It has nowhere to stand. The rope cannot hurt him, and in truth, it never could. So much of what we fear is rope that we have taken for a snake. The mind, in the half-light of not seeing clearly, turns a shadow into a threat, a silence into rejection, an uncertainty into a coming disaster. And we suffer the snake, fully and physically, though there is only rope on the road. The teaching does not promise that there are no real dangers in life. It promises something gentler. It promises that a great deal of our fear is a misperception, and that seeing clearly is the light by which it loosens and falls away. None of this is something to force. We do not free ourselves from fear by fighting it, for that is only the separate self struggling against itself, and the struggle feeds the very thing it means to end. The way through is softer than that. It begins with kindness toward the frightened one inside us. When fear arises, rather than pushing it down or being swept along by it, we can turn toward it as a parent turns toward a frightened child, without alarm and without judgment. We can notice where it sits in the body, the tightness in the chest, the knot in the belly, the breath gone shallow, and simply let it be there, held in a softer and more spacious awareness. We do not have to believe everything it tells us. Fear is a poor fortune teller. It speaks with great certainty about a future it cannot see. We can listen without obeying. We can let the moonlight rise and look again and ask quietly whether what we are facing is truly a snake or only a coil of rope on the road. There is a gentleness in this that the fearful mind never expects. It expects a fight, and instead it is met with care. It braces against rejection, and instead it is welcomed home. Slowly, over many small moments, the frightened self learns that it is not in danger after all, and it begins to unclench. And beneath all of it, there is the remembering. The fear is the shadow cast by the belief that we are separate and alone. When we touch, even for the length of a single breath, the truth that we belong to something far larger than this small self, that we are held as the wave is held by the sea, the shadow grows thin and has little left to feed on. The Buddha taught that all things pass, and fear is among them. It rises, and if we do not feed it, it falls. The frightened child looks up and sees that her family was never far away, that she was held the whole time, even in the moment of her terror. And the fear, which only ever wanted her to be safe, can finally lay itself down and rest. Let us pause here together for a few breaths. There is no hurry to move on. When the moment feels right, we will continue. The Buddha placed intention at the very heart of his teaching. Of all the things that shape a life, he said, it is intention that matters most, for our thoughts and our words and our deeds all flow from it, as surely as the cart follows the ox that pulls it. Where the intention goes, the life follows. One of the oldest collections of his sayings opens with almost these very words. All that we are, it says, arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts we make the world. Speak or act with a troubled mind, and suffering follows as the wheel follows the foot of the ox. Speak or act with a peaceful mind, and happiness follows like a shadow that never leaves. The teaching does not say that the world outside us bends to our wishes. It says something subtler. It says that the quality of mind we bring to our life is the quality of life we will know. This is a powerful idea, and it runs deeper than it first appears. Beneath everything we do, there is an aim. Some current we are moving with. Often we are not even aware of it. But it is there, steering us, and it shapes how our days unfold and how we feel inside them far more than we realize. For most of a life, that current runs in one simple direction. It is the oldest direction there is, older than thought, written into every creature that has ever lived. It is the pull toward more of what feels good and less of what hurts. Toward pleasure, away from pain. Toward comfort, away from difficulty. There is nothing shameful in it. It is the basic machinery of being alive, and it has kept living things safe since the beginning. But when it becomes the whole of what moves us, it makes for a small and anxious life, forever leaning toward the next pleasant thing and bracing against the next unpleasant one. There is a story about a wealthy merchant who lived in a great house at the heart of a busy city in a time long ago. He had spent his whole life in pursuit of comfort, and by every measure he had won. His storerooms were full. His table held the finest food in the province. His rooms were cool in summer and warm in winter. His bed was soft, his servants many. Whatever was pleasant, he had bought. Whatever was unpleasant, he had paid to keep far away. And yet, as the years went on, he found himself waking before dawn with a hollow feeling he could not name, lying in his soft bed in his fine house, strangely empty. He went to a teacher who lived simply at the edge of the city, a man who owned almost nothing, and he laid his trouble before him. "I have everything a person could want," the merchant said. "I have arranged my whole life so that nothing ever disturbs me. So why do I feel so empty? Why is there no joy in any of it anymore?" The teacher thought for a moment. Then he asked, "When was the last time you did something for someone else, expecting nothing in return?" The merchant opened his mouth to answer and found that he could not. He searched his memory, year after year of it, and every single thing he could recall had been done for himself. For his own comfort, his own pleasure, his own ease. He sat there, stunned by the silence where the answer should have been. "You have spent your life pulling everything toward yourself," the teacher said gently. "More comfort, more pleasure, more safety, all of it flowing inward to you. And a life lived only that way grows smaller and smaller until at last it is the size of a single man in a single bed with nothing to connect him to anything beyond his own walls. That is the emptiness you feel. It is not that you have too little. It is that you have been facing the wrong direction." The merchant asked what he should do. Tomorrow, said the teacher, find one person who is struggling and help them quietly, with no thought of what you will gain, and see how you feel when the sun goes down. The merchant did as he was told, more out of desperation than belief. He found a family in his district who had fallen on hard times, and he saw to it, without their ever knowing it was him, that their needs were met. And that night, for the first time in longer than he could remember, the hollow feeling was gone. In its place was something warm, something he had spent a fortune chasing, and never once managed to buy. He had discovered the second current, the one that does not pull inward, but flows out. That second current is the deeper intention, and it lives in all of us, beneath the first. It is the wish to be kind, the wish to be honest, the wish to be of some use to the people around us. It is the part of us that lies awake at the end of a hard day, untroubled by what we failed to get, aching instead over the moment we were short with someone we love. It does not shout the way our wants do, but it grows stronger with the years, and where the first current leaves us empty, this one, followed even a little, leaves us full. The merchant felt the difference in a single evening. What the Buddha understood is that we do not have to become better people first, and then earn this turning. The turning happens through the remembering itself. Each time we pause and recall what we most deeply intend, we lean a little toward that second current, and over a life, the leaning becomes the direction we travel. This turning shows itself most clearly in the small, unguarded moments of a day. Life has a way of knocking us off center. A plan collapses, or someone speaks to us harshly, or the body aches and the whole day seems to come apart, and almost before we know it, the old current takes hold again. We tighten and harden, reaching for control, or lashing out, or sinking down under the weight of it. The small and frightened self is back at the wheel, steering by pleasure and pain, and our deeper intention is nowhere to be found. The teaching is simply this. In that moment, we can remember. We can pause, even for a single breath, and ask ourselves what truly matters here. Not what would feel good, not what would win the argument, but what we most deeply wish to be. And in the asking, something shifts. The deeper intention, which had been buried under the reaction, comes quietly back into view. There is a beautiful aspiration carried in the Buddhist tradition, spoken by those who walk the path of the awakening heart. May whatever comes, pleasant or unpleasant, serve to wake me up. It is a generous way to hold a life, because it leaves nothing out. The good days and the hard ones, the gains and the losses, all of it becomes material for awakening. Nothing is wasted. Even the worst moment can serve, if we let it remind us of what we are here for. Let us turn to a story that shows how this works when life is at its most irritating, for it is rarely the great tragedies that test us, but the small daily frustrations. There is a story about a respected teacher of meditation, a man who had spent years guiding others toward calm, and who was, on a particular evening, running late to give a talk on this very subject. He had spent the afternoon helping his child with a difficult lesson, and he had left himself only a little time. He hurried out to his cart, climbed up, and took the reins, and the old horse would not move. It stood there, in the yard, head down, utterly unwilling, and no amount of urging would shift it. He had only minutes to reach the hall, where a room full of people was already gathering. There was no other horse, no other way, and no one he could send word to. And so this teacher of calm This man about to speak on peace felt the heat rise in his chest. He threw down the reins. He climbed off the cart and stamped about the yard, muttering, thoroughly and completely angry. And then, in the middle of his stamping, a thought arrived. He remembered what he was about to go and teach. He remembered the very words he had planned to speak about meeting life's difficulties with an open heart. And he stood quite still in the yard, and he almost laughed at himself, at the enormous gap between the calm man he meant to be and the furious man stamping in the dust. So he stopped. He stood still in the yard, and half to himself he said, "May this too serve to wake me up." He did not pretend the anger was gone. It was still there, simmering. But naming his intention, even in the midst of it, loosened its grip. The rage that had filled the whole yard a moment before became something he could see and hold and smile at. And whether the horse ever moved that night hardly matters to the story. What matters is that a man remembered, in the middle of losing himself, what he most wished to be. This is the thing the Buddha pointed to. We will be knocked off center, all of us, again and again. That is not a failure. The practice is not to never fall. It is only to remember, a little sooner each time, what we are here for, and to begin again. This teaching does not ask us to be perfect. It does not ask us to never feel anger or fear or the pull of the old current. The teacher in the story did feel his anger, fully. What he did was simply remember, in the midst of it, the deeper wish underneath. And that remembering was enough to begin to free him. The teacher did not punish himself for losing his temper, and this is the part most of us miss. When we fall short of who we mean to be, we tend to pile on. We are short with someone, and then we spend the next hour scolding ourselves for being short. We give in to an old habit, and then we add a long, bitter speech about how weak we are. The original stumble was brief. The story we tell ourselves about it can last for days, and it does far more harm than the stumble ever did. There is a saying attributed to the Buddha that you yourself, as much as anyone in the entire universe, deserve your love and kindness. People hear that and think first of forgiving others, but it points just as much inward. The harshest, most relentless voice many of us ever face is the one inside our own head, and it speaks to us in a way we would never dream of speaking to someone we loved. Remembering our intention quietly undoes this. When we pause and recall what we most deeply wish to be, we discover that one of those wishes is simply to be gentle, and that gentleness was never meant to stop at the edge of our own skin. The teacher in the story smiled at himself. He did not approve of the anger, but he met it without cruelty. And in that small mercy toward his own failing, the grip of it loosened. We do not soften by force. We soften by remembering that there is a kinder way to hold our own stumbling and choosing it. The deeper intention is not a whip to drive ourselves with. It is more like a lamp set in a window, a light we can always turn back toward when we have wandered out into the dark. It does not scold us for wandering. It simply waits and shines and welcomes us back whenever we remember to look. There is a story told of an old monk and a young one walking together through the monastery garden in the early morning. The young monk was troubled. "Teacher," he said, "I do not understand. Some mornings I wake full of patience and kindness, and the whole day moves with ease. Other mornings I wake with a hardness in me, quick to anger, quick to judge, and nothing goes well. It is as though there are two men living inside me, and I never know which one will wake. How can I become only the good one?" The old monk walked on a little way without answering. Then he stopped beside two bare patches of earth at the edge of the garden where he had been planting. "You are right," he said. "There are two within you. In every person there are two. One is grasping, fearful, easily angered. The other is patient, open-hearted, awake. They live in all of us, side by side, all our lives. Then how do I be rid of the bad one?" "You do not," said the old monk. "You cannot tear it out, and the trying only feeds it. These two are like seeds, both already planted in the soil of you. You cannot unplant them, but you can choose each day which one you water." The young monk was quiet, thinking. Every kind act, every honest word, every moment you remember what you truly wish to be, you pour a little water on the good seed, and it grows a little stronger. And every time you feed your anger, or follow your fear, or let yourself sink into harshness, you water the other. Over a lifetime, this watering is everything. The garden you end with is simply the one you tended. So the question is not how to kill what is unwanted in you. The question, each morning, is only this: which seed will you water today? The young monk understood. He had been waiting to wake up one day magically transformed, the bad man gone, the good man left standing alone. But that was not how a garden grew, and it was not how a person changed. The two would always be there. His whole task was the small daily choice of where to pour the water. And remembering his intention, he saw was nothing other than reaching for the watering can and turning it again and again toward the seed he wished to grow. None of this requires any special effort or any particular setting. It can happen anywhere, in any moment, in the middle of anything, at a kitchen sink, in a difficult conversation, lying awake at night. Whenever we notice the smallest flag of unease, the contraction, the hardening, the reaching, we can let it be a kind of bell calling us back. A gentle question rises. What really matters here? And the deeper intention answers every time if we pause long enough to listen. Over time, this becomes less a thing we do and more a way we are. The remembering comes faster. The wandering grows shorter. The lamp in the window is glanced at more and more often, until at last we hardly lose sight of it at all. And we discover that the life organized around love, which once seemed so far off, was never far at all. It was only waiting, beneath the noise, for us to remember it was there. Take a moment now and let these words grow quiet within. There is nowhere else to be. When you feel ready, we will carry on. There are moments in a life when our own strength simply runs out. The diagnosis comes. The person we love walks out the door. The night stretches on and the fear will not lift, and there is nothing left in us to fix it with. In moments like these, something very old stirs in the human heart. We stop trying to manage it alone, and we reach. We call out for help to something larger than ourselves. The Buddhist tradition knows this reaching well, and it speaks of it as taking refuge. The image is simple and human. When a storm comes, we look for shelter, somewhere steady to wait it out. And the Buddha pointed to 3 kinds of shelter for the heart in hard times. There is the example of the awakened ones, those who found peace before us and showed that it is possible. There is the body of wisdom and teaching they left behind to steady us when we lose our way. And there is the companionship of others walking the same path so that we never have to walk it alone. None of this asks for belief in anything. To take refuge is simply to remember, when life presses on us, that we do not stand alone and that there is something solid to lean into. This matters because of everything we have been speaking of. The small and frightened self believes it is alone, sealed off, responsible for carrying the whole weight of a life by itself. And from inside that belief, we cannot simply think our way back to peace. The tangled mind cannot untangle itself by pulling harder on the knot. But it can turn. It can lean towards something it trusts, and the moment it does, the loneliness at the heart of the fear begins to ease, because we are no longer facing the dark with nothing. There is a story at the very center of the Buddhist tradition that shows this beautifully, and it is the story of the night the Buddha awakened. Before he was the Buddha, he was a man who had left everything behind in search of an end to suffering. He had tried every path. He had studied with the great teachers of his time and surpassed them. He had fasted and strained and pushed his body nearly to breaking, and none of it had brought him free. At last, he sat down beneath a great fig tree, the tree we now call the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening, and he made a simple resolve. He would sit there with an open and steady heart until he saw clearly. And through the long night, the tradition tells us, he was visited by a figure named Mara. Now Mara is not a monster from a children's tale. Mara is something each of us knows from the inside. Mara is the voice of doubt and fear, of craving and restlessness, of every part of us that resists waking up. Mara came to the seated man and tried, all night, to pull him from his resolve. First came the temptations, every pleasant thing the mind could wish for, paraded before him to lure him from his seat. The Buddha did not grasp at them, and they drifted away like smoke. Then came the fears, every worry and threat the mind could conjure, sent to frighten him into rising. It is sometimes told that Mara loosed a great storm of arrows at him. But as each one drew near the stillness of his open heart, it turned, gently, into a flower and fell harmless to the ground at his feet. He met everything that came not by fighting it, but by remaining present and awake, and so it could not touch him. By the first light of morning, he had seen through nearly all of it. But Mara had one challenge left, the hardest one. Mara asked him, in effect, "Who are you to awaken? By what right do you sit there? Who will vouch for you?" It was the voice of the deepest doubt, the one that says, "You are alone in this, and not enough." And then came the moment the whole story turns upon. The Buddha did not argue. He did not try to prove himself or summon some private strength to answer the doubt alone. Instead, he simply reached down and laid his hand upon the earth. He called upon the earth itself to bear witness, to stand with him, to affirm that he belonged, that he had every right to awaken, that he was held by something far older and larger than his single self. And it is said the earth responded. A deep trembling, a sound like thunder rolling through the ground, the earth speaking its yes. And in that moment Mara scattered and was gone. And the man beneath the tree became the Buddha, the awakened one. This image of the hand upon the earth has been carved and painted 10,000 times across the centuries, and there is a reason it has lasted so long. The story could have been told another way. It could have been the tale of a strong man who, by the sheer force of his own will, gritted his teeth through one long night and conquered his demons single-handedly. That is the kind of story our culture often loves, the lone hero who needs no one. But that is not the story the Buddhist tradition kept. In the story it kept, at the final and hardest moment, the awakening one does not stand alone. He reaches out. He calls upon the whole of the earth to which he belongs, and only then is he free. The teaching hidden in that gesture is gentle and freeing. We are not meant to do this alone. The deepest awakening is not the triumph of a separate self over its troubles. It is the remembering that we were never separate to begin with, that we are held, that we belong to something vast that will answer when we call. When the voice of doubt says you are alone in this, the hand upon the earth is the quiet reply. I am not alone. I am held by all of this. What we call upon will differ for each of us, and the Buddhist tradition has always made room for that. Some reach toward the figure of the Buddha himself, or toward the boundless compassion that the tradition pictures as a great being who hears every cry of the world. Some reach toward the earth, as he did. Some, in their own lives, find themselves calling on a grandmother who loved them, or on some presence of kindness they cannot quite name but have always trusted was there. Let us explore a small story about this. In a mountain village long ago, there lived a young woman who was known for her steadiness in hard times. And one day, a troubled traveler asked her how she kept her heart so calm when life pressed on her. She told him that, when she was a girl, frightened of the dark and of the long nights, her grandmother had carved her a tiny bird from a piece of pale wood and pressed it into her palm. This little bird, the grandmother had said, was held by my hands, and by my own grandmother's hands before me, back further than anyone can remember. Whenever you hold it, you are never holding it alone. All of us are holding it with you. For years, the young woman carried the little bird everywhere, closed in her hand whenever she was afraid. And then one day she found that she had lost it, somewhere along a road, and she wept, certain her comfort was gone. But that night, frightened and with empty hands, she closed her fingers anyway, as if the bird were still there. And she felt them all the same, the long line of loving hands reaching back through the years. She understood then that the little bird had never been the thing that held her. It had only been a way of remembering that she was held. After that, she never needed it again. She could call on that warmth anywhere, simply by closing her hand and turning her heart toward it. This is what it truly means to reach for refuge. The grandmother, the carved bird, the figure of the Buddha, the great compassion, the earth itself. These are doorways. They are ways the heart reaches back towards something it has always belonged to. And what answers, in the end, is not somewhere far off. It is the same warmth and steadiness that has been within us all along, which we sometimes need to picture as outside us before we can find it again inside. The one who calls out in love for help and the love that answers are not finally two different things. When we turn toward what we trust, we are turning toward the deepest part of our own nature, the part that was never frightened and never alone. We simply rediscover it in the turning. This is why the Buddha taught that the truest refuge is found not somewhere far away, but within. We reach outward for steadiness, toward the earth, toward a beloved face, toward the vast compassion the tradition speaks of And what we find waiting at the end of that reach is something that was never truly outside us at all. So in any hard moment, there is this simple movement available. We need not face it gripping at our own small strength. We can reach. We can lay a hand upon the earth, in fact or only in imagination. We can bring to mind a face that once made us feel safe, or call, in whatever words are ours, upon whatever presence of love and steadiness we trust. The words do not need to be the right words. There is no correct form, no special phrase that works better than the cry of an honest heart. What matters is only the turning, the leaning of the heart toward what holds it. And in that reaching, the loneliness at the center of our fear begins to dissolve, because we remember, even faintly, that we belong to something that has never once let us go. Let us linger here a little while. There is nothing to do and nothing to reach for. Rest in this for as long as you like, and we will go on when it feels right. It is evening, and something has gone wrong. A hard conversation, a piece of bad news, an old sadness that surfaces for no clear reason. And almost at once, without deciding to, we begin to move away from it. We turn on something to watch. We open the cupboard though we are not hungry. We pick up the phone and scroll without seeing. We find a task, any task, to throw ourselves into. We get busy, we numb, we look away. Anything rather than simply sit with the feeling that has arrived. This is the oldest habit there is, the move to get away from our own pain as fast as we can. And there are 100 ways to do it, most so automatic we hardly notice we are doing them. The trouble is that none of them work for long. The feeling we fled is still there in the morning, waiting. The Buddhist tradition saw something about this long ago, and anyone who looks honestly at their own life comes to see it too. The running causes more suffering than the thing we are running from. The avoiding hurts more than the feeling itself would have. We spend enormous energy building walls against our own pain, and in the end the walls become a kind of prison, and we are the ones shut inside. Zen has always pointed in the other direction. Its whole spirit is to meet this moment directly, exactly as it is, without the endless turning away. To sit and let what is here be here. Part of what sends us running is a hidden belief that the difficult thing inside us is simply bad, something to be gotten rid of, with nothing of worth in it. But that belief is rarely true. There is a story of a man who lived above a small valley and drew his water each day from a spring at the top of the hill. He carried it down in 2 large pots that hung from the ends of a pole across his shoulders. One pot was perfect and always arrived full. The other had a crack down its side, and by the time he reached his home each day, it was only half full. The rest leaked out along the path. The cracked pot was ashamed of itself. For a long time it said nothing, but one morning its sorrow spilled over, and it spoke to the man. "I am sorry," it said. "Every day I leak. You do all this work, and because of my crack, you only ever receive half of what you carry in me. I am a failure. You should throw me away and find a better pot." The man listened, and he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tomorrow, as we walk down the hill, I want you to look at the path. Look at your side of it." The next day, as they came down the hill, the cracked pot looked, and for the first time it saw. All along its side of the path, there was a long ribbon of flowers, the most beautiful in the whole valley, blooming bright in the morning sun. On the other pot's side, there was only bare earth. "Do you see them?" the man asked. "I have always known about your crack. So long ago I planted flower seeds all along your side of the path. And every single day, as we walk home, you water them. All this time, while you thought you were only failing, you have been making this whole hillside bloom. There would be no flowers here at all if you were not exactly as you are." The crackpot had spent so long ashamed of the very thing that, all along, had been quietly bringing beauty into the world. What it had taken for its flaw was the source of something lovely it could never have given otherwise. So it is with the parts of ourselves we are quickest to reject. There is an old teaching that says this even of our most difficult feelings, and it does so through a striking image. This teaching comes from the Tibetan tradition, and it speaks through the image of a poison tree. It describes 3 different people who come upon such a tree growing by the road. The first traveler comes around a bend and sees the tree, heavy with poison fruit, its leaves glistening with something dangerous. And his whole response is fear and aversion. "This thing is a threat," he thinks. "It could harm me. It could harm others who pass this way." And so he takes up an axe, and in a kind of panic he sets about cutting it down, hacking at it, desperate to destroy it before it can do any harm. He wants it gone. He cannot rest while it stands. This is how most of us meet the difficulties of our lives. Anger arises in us, or fear, or craving, or grief, and our first response is, "Get rid of this. Cut it down. This should not be here." We treat our own inner experience as an enemy to be destroyed, and we go to war with ourselves, swinging the axe at whatever we find unpleasant. It is exhausting, and it never quite works, because a feeling cannot be cut down. It only grows back, often stronger, fed by the very struggle against it. Then, a second traveler comes down the road, one who has journeyed a little further in life and learned a little more. She sees the same poison tree, and her first impulse is not to attack it. She has grown wiser than that. She feels something closer to compassion. "I will not cut it down," she says. "It is a living thing, and it has its own life. But it is dangerous, and others might be harmed by it." And so, thoughtfully, she builds a fence around the tree. She marks it off. She keeps it at a careful distance so that it cannot hurt anyone, and so that she need not deal with it directly. This is a real step forward. There is kindness in it, and there are healthy boundaries in it. Many of us reach this stage and stay here for a long time, and it is far better than swinging the axe. We learn to hold our difficult feelings at arm's length, to acknowledge them without being ruled by them, to keep a careful fence between ourselves and what we find hard. And yet the tree is still treated as a problem, something to be managed and kept away. There is still a wall. The poison is still only poison. And then, the teaching tells us, a third traveler arrives. This one has gone deepest of all into the understanding of life. He sees the very same poison tree, and his response is unlike either of the others. He looks at it, and a slow smile crosses his face, and he says, "How fortunate. Exactly what I was looking for." For this traveler is a healer, and he knows something the others did not. He knows that the very poison in that fruit, rightly understood, gathered with care, and prepared with skill, becomes a powerful medicine, able to cure the sick and ease great suffering. What the first man wanted to destroy, and the second to fence away, the third receives as a gift. He sees in the most dangerous thing on the road the very thing he needs. And so he gathers the fruit, and he makes from the poison a medicine that heals. This is the deepest way to meet the difficulties of a life, and it is what our practice slowly makes possible. We stop swinging the axe at our pain. We even take down the fence, and we begin to discover that the very things we feared most, the grief, the anger, the loneliness, the fear itself, carry within them something we need. They become our medicine. They soften us, they deepen us, they open our hearts to others who suffer as we have suffered. Met fully and with care, the poison becomes the cure. Now this is gradual, and the teaching is honest about that. We cannot eat the poison all at once. The healer does not become a healer overnight. It takes a certain readiness, a slow growing of the capacity to be present with what is hard. We begin where we are, perhaps still swinging the axe at some things, still keeping the fence around others. And little by little, as we grow more able, we find we can turn toward more, hold more, transform more. There is no rushing it, and no failing at it. There is only the gradual ripening of the heart's ability to meet life directly. Let us explore a story about this turning. In a town long ago there lived a woman who carried a heavy sorrow. She would not speak of it, and she would not look at it. She filled every hour with work and errands and noise, so that there would never be a quiet moment in which the sorrow might catch up with her. From the outside, she seemed tireless, but she was growing thin and worn, and she slept badly, and a hardness had crept into her that pushed away even those who loved her. At last, exhausted, she went to a teacher who lived nearby and was known for helping troubled hearts. She told him she could not go on, that she was running and could not stop, and she did not even know from what. The teacher poured her tea and asked her to sit. "You are like someone fleeing their own shadow," he said kindly. "The faster you run, the faster it follows, and you will never outrun it, because it is part of you. But there is something you have not tried." "What is that?" She asked. "Stop," he said. "Turn around. Sit down where you are, and let the thing you are fleeing catch up with you at last. Do not fight it. Do not push it away. Simply let it come and feel it and stay." She was afraid. She believed that if she let the sorrow reach her, it would swallow her whole. But she was too tired to run any longer. And so, sitting there, she stopped. She let herself grow still. And the sorrow she had fled for so long came over her at last, in a great, slow wave. It did not destroy her. It moved through her, and she wept as she had not let herself weep in years. And the teacher simply sat with her, steady, while it passed. And when it had passed, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt light. She felt clean, as a sky feels clean after rain. The sorrow had not been the enemy. The running had been the enemy. And once she turned and met what she had feared, it could finally begin to soften and to heal and to set her free. There is a kind of relief that comes when we stop running. The Buddha taught that grasping and aversion are the roots of our suffering, the constant reaching for the pleasant and pushing away of the unpleasant, and that peace is found in releasing both. When we finally turn and face what we have been fleeing, something we did not expect tends to happen. The thing is rarely as terrible as the fear of it was. The grief we would not let ourselves feel turns out to be bearable, and even, in its own way, a kind of homecoming. The anger we kept fenced away turns out to have something to teach us. The feeling we were so sure would destroy us rises, moves through us, and passes, and leaves us more whole than before. Part of why this works is simple, and the Buddha pointed to it again and again. Everything passes. No feeling, however strong, is permanent. A wave of grief or fear or anger rises, crests, and falls, the same as everything else in this changing world, if only we will let it complete its movement. But when we flee a feeling, or fight it, or fence it away, we interrupt that natural passing. We freeze it in place. The grief we refuse to feel does not leave. It waits, just out of sight, and colors everything from there. The anger we will not look at hardens into resentment that lasts for years. What we turn toward can move and change and pass. Only what we refuse to face is condemned to stay. So the turning toward our experience, frightening as it can seem, is the kindest and most freeing thing we can do. It is not a grim endurance, a bracing to suffer more. It is the opposite. It is the laying down of a struggle we were never going to win, and the discovery that what we feared was unbearable was, all along, something we could meet and hold and pass through into peace. There is a saying in Zen that captures the whole of it. When walking, just walk. When sitting, just sit. And when grieving, we might add, just grieve. To be fully in our life as it actually is, even when it is hard, and not somewhere else, fleeing. A student once said that to feel fully, even to feel sorrow, was a strange kind of joy, because it was real, and there is something deeply satisfying about meeting our own life honestly, holding nothing at a distance. That is the freedom the third traveler found. Not a life without poison trees, for no life is without them, but the slow discovery that everything which grows along our road, even the most difficult thing, can be received and worked with and turned at last to medicine. Let these words settle now, and let the stillness do the rest. Stay with it a while, and we will go on whenever you are ready. There is a tenderness in us that we spend much of our lives protecting. It is the soft place underneath all our defenses, where we are most easily touched, most easily hurt. And because it can be hurt, we guard it. We build a hardness around it, a kind of armor, so that the world cannot reach in and wound us there. No one chooses this armor on purpose. It forms slowly, over years, out of the small and large hurts of a life. A child reaches out and is met with coldness and learns to reach a little less. A young heart loves and is wounded and quietly resolves to love more carefully next time. Piece by piece, almost without our noticing, we build the shell and we come to mistake it for who we are. We forget there was ever a time we stood in the world unguarded. The trouble is that the same armor which keeps out the hurt also keeps out the love. The shell that protects our tenderness also seals it off, and a heart sealed off cannot be reached by anything, neither sorrow nor joy. The teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, spoke of this tender place as the genuine heart of sadness, our tenderness for life itself. It is not a weakness to be overcome. It is the most alive part of us, and the doorway to a deeper kind of love. So this is about courage, not the loud kind that charges into danger, but the quieter courage it takes to stay soft when everything in us wants to harden. The courage not to walk away from our own tender heart when it begins to ache. The Zen tradition speaks often of the open heart and the open hand, of meeting life with nothing held back and nothing clenched tight. The armor we build is the opposite of this. It is a clenching, a closing of the hand, and though it feels like safety, it does not make the pain go away. It only locks it in and locks us in with it. There is a story of an old man in a mountain village who had not let anyone close to him in many years. Long ago, he had lost someone dear, and the grief had been so great that he had decided, somewhere deep inside, never to feel such a thing again. So he had grown hard. He kept his face stern and his door shut. The village children were afraid of him, and the grown ones left him alone, and year by year, his house grew colder and more silent. One winter, a small bird, half frozen, found its way through a gap in his shutters and fell to the floor of his house. The old man's first thought was to put it back out into the cold and be done with it. But the bird was so small and shivered so that something in him he had long forgotten stirred. Almost against his will, he cupped it in his hands to warm it. He kept it through the winter and fed it and spoke to it, though he would have been ashamed for anyone to hear. And in caring for that one small living thing, the hardness he had built over so many years began, very slowly, to thaw. He had believed his armor was keeping him safe. He discovered it had only been keeping him alone. When at last the spring came and the bird flew free, the old man found that he wanted, for the first time in longer than he could remember, to open his door and to be among the living once more. The heart we wall off to spare ourselves pain is the same heart we wall off from joy, from warmth, from love. There is no armor that keeps out only the hard things. It keeps out everything. Most of us, when something hurts deeply, do one of two things. We either close down, growing hard and cold and numb, or we flee, filling our days with noise so we never have to feel the ache. Both are ways of walking away, and both, in the end, cost us more than the hurt would have. Because the hurt, when we finally allow it, when we stay with it instead of fleeing, does something we do not expect. It opens us. The Buddhists have a word for the heart that opens in this way, a soft and awakened heart. They call it bodhicitta, and it is born, very often, not in our moments of strength, but in our moments of being broken open. The places where life has cracked us are often the places where the most love can finally flow through. There is great courage in this. It takes more strength to stay tender than to grow hard. Anyone can build a wall. It takes a brave heart to leave the gate open, especially after it has been hurt. Let us explore a story about this kind of courage, one that touches the tender places of a life. There was once a woman whose father was very old and had come, at last, to his final days. Their love had never been a simple thing. All through her life he had been a difficult man, quick to find fault, slow to show warmth, and she had carried for many years the quiet ache of a child who never quite felt she was enough in her father's eyes. Now he lay frail and failing, being cared for in a house of rest, and she had come to help look after him in the time that remained. One afternoon she came to his bedside, and for reasons she never understood, he turned to her in irritation and told her, sharply, that he did not want her there, that she should leave him be. and something in her broke. It was not only the words of that one moment. It was the weight of a lifetime of such moments, all the times she had reached toward him and been pushed away, rising up at once. The hurt was so great that she went and packed her things. She decided she would go and not come back. She had had enough. But as she was leaving, one of the people who cared for the old man saw her distress and stopped her and gently asked what had happened. And after she had told her story, this kind soul said something simple. "Do not go yet. Go back in and tell him. Tell him all of it." So she set down her bags and she went back into that room, and for the first time in her whole life, she let it all out. Every hurt, every time she had felt unwanted, all the sorrow of a lifetime of not feeling loved by this man. She did not shout it. She simply spoke it, at last, with her tender heart wide open. And the old man heard her. Something reached him through the words, and he wept, and he asked her to forgive him. And then came the part of the story that is so easy to misunderstand. She could not forgive him. Not yet. She looked at her father and said, with great honesty, "I am not going to leave, but I cannot forgive you yet." And she stayed. Now, we might expect the story to end there, with a tidy and immediate reconciliation. But the truth of the heart is rarely so quick, and this is the wisdom hidden in the tale. For many days she stayed at his side, and in those days she did not force anything. She did not paper over the hurt with words of forgiveness she did not yet feel. She simply let herself feel, fully, all the grief that had waited a lifetime to be felt. Wave after wave of it rose in her, and she let each one come and stayed open and did not run. And only then, after the grief had been truly felt, after she had given it the room it needed, did something open in her on its own. A real forgiveness came, not forced, not premature, but risen up from the depths of a heart that had finally let itself break and be broken open. And in those last days they found together a closeness, a tenderness, a love that had never once been possible in all the long years before. She had received, at the very end, the thing she had longed for all her life. What she understood afterward was this: had she spoken the words of forgiveness too soon, only to be done with the discomfort, she would have sealed the old hurt over without healing it. The pain would have stayed, buried but alive, beneath a thin crust of pretend peace. It was precisely because she let herself feel all of it, because she had the courage not to walk away from her own breaking heart, that a true and lasting love became possible. The opening of her heart, by letting all that pain be felt, was the very thing that freed her to love. There is a teaching here that runs against much of what we are told. We are often encouraged to forgive quickly, to move on, to put things behind us. And there is a place for that. But the heart cannot be rushed. Real forgiveness, real letting go, is not a decision we make with the mind. It is something that ripens in its own time, once the grief beneath it has been honored and felt. We have all tried the other way, the forced forgiveness, the hasty moving on. We tell ourselves we are over something before we truly are, because the feeling is uncomfortable and we want to be done with it. We say the words, we go through the motions, and for a while it seems to work. But the buried hurt does not stay buried. It leaks out in small ways, in a sharpness we did not intend, in a coldness towards someone we love, in a heaviness we cannot explain. The unfelt grief does not disappear. It simply goes underground and waits. And what we never let ourselves fully feel, we can never fully be free of. The woman in the story knew this in her bones, even before she could have put it into words. Some wise part of her refused to say what she did not yet feel. And because she honored that, because she let the long-buried sorrow finally have its day, the forgiveness that came at last was real, and it held. The Buddha taught that we cannot find peace by pushing our pain away, that the way through suffering leads directly through the middle of it, never around. To feel our grief fully is not to wallow in it or to be swallowed by it. It is to honor what is real, to stay present with our own tender heart, and to trust that feeling, fully felt, will move and change and eventually set us free. This is the genuine heart of sadness that Trungpa spoke of. It is not depression, and it is not despair. It is the tender, awake openness of a heart that has not closed itself off from life. A heart that can be touched. A heart that grieves because it loves, and that, in its very grieving, stays open enough for love to find its way back in. So when life brings us to one of these tender places, and it will, for no life is spared them, there is a kind of quiet bravery available to us. We do not have to harden. We do not have to flee into busyness and noise. We can stay. We can let ourselves feel what is real, trusting that we are strong enough to hold it, and that what we feel will not destroy us, but will, in time, deepen and free us. There is nothing to force here, and nothing to perform. It is only the willingness, when the heart aches, to keep the gate open rather than slamming it shut. To stay tender, to not walk away from our own tender, living, loving heart. Let us be quiet together for a few breaths. Whatever you are feeling can simply remain just as it is, with nothing to fix. We will go on when the moment feels right. Of all the voices that trouble a human life, one of the most relentless is the voice of self-judgment. It is the inner critic that watches everything we do and finds it wanting. We say the wrong thing, and it replays the moment for hours. We fall short of what we meant to be, and it delivers its verdict, harsh and sure. For many people, this is the cruelest voice they will ever hear, and it lives inside their own head. The strange thing is how much we trust it. We would never speak to a friend the way this voice speaks to us. We would never tell someone we loved that they were worthless, that they always ruin things, that they should be ashamed. And yet we say these things to ourselves daily and take them for truth. We often believe this harshness is necessary, that without it we would grow lazy or careless, that the critic is the thing keeping us in line. But look closely, and the opposite turns out to be true. The harsh voice does not make us better. It makes us anxious and small and afraid to try. A child scolded for every mistake does not blossom. A child held with patience and warmth is the one who grows brave enough to learn. We are no different. The part of us that is always under attack does not improve. It only learns to hide. And much of what the critic says is simply not true. In the heat of its judgment, it speaks in absolutes, always and never and everyone, painting our small stumble as proof of some deep and permanent flaw. But a single unkind moment is not who we are. A mistake is something we did, not something we are. the voice that collapses the two, that turns one misstep into a verdict on our whole worth, is not telling us the truth. It is only frightened, and frightened things exaggerate. There is a kinder and wiser way to meet our own missteps, and the Buddhist tradition points toward it. It begins with a single question, gently asked, what was the fear underneath that? Let us explore a story about the fear that hides beneath our hardest behavior. There was once a monk who was known throughout his monastery for his terrible temper. The smallest thing could set him off, a misplaced tool, a careless remark, a task done differently than he would have done it. He would flare up in anger, and his sharp words wounded those around him, and afterward, he was always filled with shame, which somehow only made the next outburst more likely. He tried for years to conquer his temper by force, scolding himself, punishing himself, vowing each time that it would never happen again. And each time, it happened again. At last, he went to the old teacher of the monastery and confessed his despair. "I have tried everything," he said. "I have fought this anger with all my strength, and I cannot defeat it. There must be something wrong with me." The old teacher looked at him with great kindness. "You have been fighting the wrong battle," she said. "Anger is never the root. It is always the smoke from some other fire. Tell me, in the moment, just before you grow angry, what do you feel?" The monk started to answer, then stopped. He had never once looked beneath the anger. He had only ever fought it. So he began to watch. And over the following weeks, each time the anger rose, instead of either exploding or punishing himself, he paused and looked beneath it, asking what the teacher had asked. "What is here, just before the anger?" And what he found astonished him. Underneath the anger, every single time, was fear. When his tool was misplaced, beneath his rage was a fear of losing control, of things falling into chaos. When his work was criticized, beneath his sharpness was an old, deep fear that he was not good enough, that he never had been. The anger had been a kind of armor all along, thrown up in an instant to cover a frightened and tender place he had never wanted anyone to see. And once he could see the fear, he could meet it, not with a weapon, but with understanding. When the old dread of not being enough arose, he learned to say to himself gently, "Ah, there is that frightened one again," and to hold it with care rather than swinging the axe of anger over it. And slowly, over many months, the temper that had ruled him for a lifetime began to loosen its grip. He had spent years trying to cut down a tree by hacking at its branches. The teacher had shown him the root. This is true not only of anger, but of nearly all our hardest behavior. When we have acted in a way we are not proud of, when we have been short or selfish or unkind, the habit is to reach straight for judgment. What is wrong with me? Why did I do that? I am a bad person. But the kinder question, the one the teacher gave the monk, changes everything. We ask, instead, what was the fear underneath? Because beneath almost every unkind or grasping or defensive thing we do, if we look honestly, there is fear. We snapped at someone, and beneath it was a fear of not being respected. We held on too tightly, and beneath it was a fear of being left. We lied, or hid, or made ourselves small, and beneath it was a fear of not being enough. The behavior we judge so harshly is almost never the real story. It is the surface. The fear is what lies beneath. And when we find the fear, something remarkable happens. The hardness we feel toward ourselves begins to soften. It is difficult to keep condemning a frightened thing. When we see that the unkind word came from fear, that the selfish act came from some old hurt or some hidden dread, our heart cannot help but soften toward the one who was afraid. Which is to say, toward ourselves. The Buddha understood that harshness, even harshness turned inward, only deepens suffering. He taught a love that excludes no one, and he was clear that this love must include ourselves. To meet our own fear with understanding rather than condemnation is not weakness or excuse-making. It is the beginning of real change, because a frightened heart that is met with kindness can finally begin to settle, while a frightened heart that is only ever punished stays frightened and keeps acting out of its fear. There is a teaching the Buddha gave that speaks to this directly, about what he called the second arrow. When something painful happens to us, he said, it is as though we are struck by an arrow. There is real pain in it, and that pain is unavoidable. This is the first arrow, and it comes simply from being alive in a world where difficult things happen. But then, most of us do something extra. We reach back, take a second arrow, and drive it into the same wound. We are hurt, and then we are angry that we are hurt. We make a mistake, and then we attack ourselves for making it. We feel sad, and then we judge ourselves for feeling sad. The first arrow, life shoots at us. The second arrow, we shoot at ourselves. And the second arrow, very often, hurts far more than the first. Consider how this works in an ordinary day. Something small goes wrong, a careless word, a forgotten task, a moment of impatience. The event itself is minor and soon forgotten by everyone else. But the mind takes hold of it. Why am I like this? What must they think of me? I always do this. By evening, a passing stumble has become a long and bitter trial, and we lie awake wounded not by what happened, which was small, but by arrow after arrow of our own making. The first arrow lasted a moment. The second we can carry for days. To set down the second arrow is not to pretend the first did not hurt. It is simply to stop adding to our own pain, to feel the first arrow honestly, and then to meet ourselves in the hurt with the same tenderness we would offer anyone we loved. This is the power of looking beneath. Our worst behavior and our harshest self-judgment both tend to dissolve when we stop fighting the surface and turn, with kindness, toward the frightened thing underneath. And this gift, once we have given it to ourselves, naturally extends to everyone around us. For if our own unkindness springs from fear, then so does theirs. The person who was sharp with us today, the one who cut us off, the one who let us down, each of them, somewhere beneath the surface, is a frightened heart protecting a tender place, exactly as we are. This does not mean we must accept poor treatment or pretend that harm does not matter, but it changes how we hold it. Instead of meeting the other person's hard surface with a hard surface of our own, we begin to sense the fear beneath theirs, and our heart, rather than closing, stays open. The Buddha taught a compassion that leaves no one out, and this is how it grows in us, not as a lofty ideal, but as the simple recognition that everyone we meet is, like us, a little afraid, and doing their best to feel safe in a world that does not always feel safe. And there is a deep relief that comes when we finally stop running, whether we are running from a feeling or from ourselves. So much of our suffering is the running itself, the endless effort to escape what we feel, to fix ourselves, to be other than we are. When at last we stop, when we sit down and let what is true simply be true, something settles. The Buddha pointed again and again to this. Peace is not found by getting somewhere else. It is found by arriving fully where we already are. This is the heart of what Zen points to in its love of simple sitting. Not sitting in order to achieve some special state, not striving to become a better or calmer person, but simply sitting still and letting everything be exactly as it is, including the parts of us we have spent a lifetime trying to escape. There is a Zen saying that the moment you seek something, you have already missed it. The peace we chase so hard recedes the harder we chase it, and arrives the moment we stop chasing and sit down where we are. There is an old image of a person who sits down in a forest and grows still, and after a while, the very fears they had been fleeing come and stand before them in the open. And because the person does not run and does not fight, but simply sits and regards them with a steady and kindly gaze, the fears lose their power. They are seen at last for what they are, and seen clearly, they begin to fade. What we run from chases us. What we turn and face with kindness loses its hold. So when we catch ourselves in the grip of some behavior we do not like, or in the lash of our own self-judgment, there is a gentler path than the fight. We can pause and ask what fear is hidden underneath. We can set down the second arrow we were about to fire at ourselves. And we can meet whatever we find, not as an enemy, but as a frightened part of us that has only ever wanted to feel safe, and that softens, as all frightened things do, when it is finally met with love. Rest for a moment now, and let any hardness toward yourself ease just a little. There is no hurry here. We will carry on when you are ready. There is something we rarely admit, even to ourselves. We cannot open our hearts on command. We can be told 1,000 times to let go, to feel our feelings, to soften, and still the heart stays closed, because it does not yet feel safe enough to open. The heart is wise in this. It will not lower its defenses until it senses that it is held. Consider how this works with a frightened child. A child who feels unsafe will not show what is wrong. She will hide it, or deny it, or harden, and no amount of insisting will draw it out. But let that same child feel truly safe, gathered up in arms that will not drop her, sensing that there will be no punishment and no shame, only warmth, and slowly the truth comes. The tears come. Whatever was held tight begins to loosen. The child opens, not because she was told to, but because at last it was safe to. We are no different. The contractions in our own hearts, the old hurts and fears we keep guarded, will not release until there is a sense of safety around them, until something holds us gently enough that we dare to let go. This holding is what the old traditions understood so well, and it has a name. A container. A safe and loving space in which the heart can finally open. This container takes many forms. Sometimes it is the warmth of a single trusted friend. Sometimes it is the steadiness of our own kind awareness, learning at last to hold our own pain the way a good parent holds a child. But one of the oldest and most powerful containers of all, and one the Buddha placed at the very center of his teaching, is the simple presence of others who are walking the same path. the gathering, the community. In the Buddhist tradition, this community is so important that it is counted as one of the great supports of a whole spiritual life, named alongside the example of the awakened and the body of their teaching. The Buddha called this third support the company of fellow travelers, those who are also trying to live with open hearts. He understood that we are not meant to awaken alone, sealed in our separate struggles. We awaken together, held by one another. This is why, for thousands of years, those who took the path most seriously have so often gathered to live and practice side by side. In the Zen monasteries, this has always been so. The monks sit together in the same hall, rise together before dawn, eat together in silence, and do the simple work of the day together. Much of the deepest training happens through this shared life, rather than in solitude, in the small frictions and kindnesses of living closely with others, in being seen, day after day, exactly as one is. The community is not a backdrop to the practice. It is the practice. There is a moment, often told of the Buddha's life, when a beloved student remarked that he had come to believe that good companionship, the fellowship of those on the path, was half of the spiritual life. And the Buddha gently corrected him. "Not half," he said. "Good companionship is the whole of the spiritual life." He knew that without others to hold us, to walk beside us, to remind us of what we are when we forget, the journey is nearly impossible. And with them, it becomes not only possible but warm and shared, and far less lonely. There is a story of two travelers crossing a high mountain pass in deep winter. The cold was fierce, and the snow had begun to fall heavily, and they still had a long way to go before they would reach shelter on the far side. As they walked, they came upon a third traveler, lying in the snow, half frozen, too weak to rise. He had given up and was slipping away into the cold. One of the two said they must hurry on, or they would never make it before nightfall. But the other could not leave the fallen man. He lifted him onto his back, and though it cost him a great effort, he carried him through the snow. The one who hurried ahead, walking alone and unburdened, felt himself growing colder and colder with each step, chilled to the bone by the still mountain air. But the one who carried the stranger had, through the labor of carrying, kept his own body warm, and the warmth of his body, pressed close, slowly revived the half-frozen man on his back. By the time they reached the shelter on the far side, the two who had traveled together were both warm and well, while the one who went alone arrived shivering and spent, having nearly succumbed to the very cold that the carrying had kept at bay. The carrier had been kept warm by his burden, and the burden had been kept alive by the carrier. There is a deep truth hidden in that old tale. We imagine that to carry one another is a weight that slows us down, that we would do better to look only to ourselves. But it is often in the carrying that we ourselves are kept warm. The reaching out to hold another, far from depleting us, is the very thing that keeps our own heart alive. We are saved, again and again, by the ones we stop to help, and by the ones who stop to help us. Why, then, does the presence of others heal us so? Part of the answer is in something that happens when we finally speak aloud what we have carried in secret. Most of us hold things we believe are too shameful, too painful, too strange to say out loud. We carry them alone, in the dark, and in the carrying they grow heavy and large. We become certain that we are the only ones, that no one else has felt this, that if others knew, they would turn away. The secret isolates us, and the isolation makes the secret heavier still. But something remarkable happens when, in the safety of a trusted circle, someone finally dares to speak the unspeakable thing. They say it, trembling, certain of being judged. And instead, someone across the circle leans in and says, quietly, "Yes, me too. I have felt that. I know that pain." And in that instant, something shifts that can never quite shift back. The thing that felt so personal, so uniquely shameful, is revealed to be simply human. It was never a mark of being broken. It was only a part of being alive, shared by more people than we ever imagined. The pain does not vanish, but it changes. It stops being my pain, my private burden, my secret failing, and becomes simply the pain, a sorrow that belongs to all of us, that we carry together. And a sorrow carried together weighs almost nothing compared to a sorrow carried alone. Let us explore a story about this, set in a village of long ago. In a certain village there was an old and gentle custom, passed down for generations. Whenever one person among them was suffering, carrying a grief or a shame or a fear too heavy to bear alone, the village would gather in the evening around a great fire. And there, in the warm light, one by one, the people would speak. Not only the one who suffered, but everyone. Each person, in turn, would tell something true about their own life, some sorrow they carried, some fear that visited them in the night, some way they too had stumbled or failed or grieved. There was a young woman in this village who had done something she was deeply ashamed of, a thing she was certain no one else could understand. She believed she was alone in it, marked, unforgivable. She dreaded the gathering. She was sure that when her turn came to speak, the others would draw back from her in judgment. But as the fire burned and the circle went on, she listened. And she heard the eldest and most respected man in the village speak of a fear that had haunted him his whole life, the very kind of fear she thought was hers alone. She heard a woman she had always admired confess to a sorrow much like her own. One after another, in the firelight, her neighbors laid down the very burdens she had believed only she carried. And by the time her turn came, she found she was no longer afraid. She spoke her truth, simply, and as she did, she watched the faces around the fire soften with recognition rather than harden with judgment. Heads nodding, eyes warm with understanding. Yes, those faces said, "We know. We have been there too." She walked home that night feeling something she had not felt in years. Lighter, held, no longer alone with the thing she had carried. It had not disappeared, but it had been set down, for a while, in the middle of that circle, where many hands could hold it. And she understood at last why the old custom had survived so long. It was not that speaking made the suffering vanish. It was that speaking, in the presence of others who understood, took away the loneliness that had made the suffering unbearable. This is the gift of true community, and it is why the Buddha treasured it so. When we are held in a circle of others who are also doing their honest best to live and to love and to bear what life brings, we are reminded of a truth the isolated heart forgets. We are not alone. We never were. Our struggles, which felt so singular, are the common struggles of every human heart. Our fears are shared fears. Our griefs are shared griefs. And there is a tenderness that grows between people when they have witnessed one another in this way. when they have seen past the polished surfaces each of us presents, and into the soft, struggling, frightened, hoping heart underneath. We stop comparing. We stop pretending. We meet one another, at last, in the simple truth of being human together. And in that meeting, there is a warmth that can hold almost anything. We do not have to gather around a literal fire to find this. It can be found wherever two or more people meet with honesty and care, wherever someone dares to be real and another receives it with kindness. The container can be a circle of many, or it can be a single faithful friendship. What matters is the sense of being safely held, so that the heart, no longer needing to defend itself, can finally open. So if we carry something alone in the dark, something we have believed we must hold entirely by ourselves, it helps to remember that the holding need not be solitary. The heart was never meant to bear its burdens in isolation. We are strands in one great web, each of us, and what touches one touches all. When we let ourselves be held by others, and when we offer that same holding in return, the heaviest things in a life grow lighter, shared between us in the warm circle of those who understand. Let everything grow calm for a moment. There is nothing to carry alone right now, and nothing you must hold. Feel yourself part of something larger, and we will go on when it feels right. Sometimes a feeling arrives that is simply bigger than we feel ready for. A sadness heavier than we know what to do with. A wave of worry that seems to fill the whole mind. An anger or a hurt that feels too large to hold. When a feeling grows this big, our first instinct is usually to push against it, to try to make it go away, to get the better of it somehow. And this rarely brings the peace we hope for. The harder we struggle against a strong feeling, the stronger it tends to become. We know this struggle well. Sorrow rises in us, and we tell ourselves we should not feel this way, and the sorrow only presses closer. Frustration stirs, and we clamp down on it, and it simmers beneath the surface and slips out sideways. Worry visits in the quiet hours, and we argue with it and try to reason it away, and it only settles in more firmly. Most of us have spent an evening or two like this, gently at war with our own heart, and woken no more at peace than before. The Buddhist tradition points toward a different way, one that can seem strange at first. Instead of meeting these difficult feelings with force, we learn to meet them with tenderness. Instead of barring the door against them, we learn to welcome them in. This is not weakness, and it is not surrender. It is something far wiser. For our hardest feelings, when we look closely, are very often frightened, weary things that have only come to be received. And a frightened thing cannot be driven away by force. It can only be comforted. Let us explore a story that holds this teaching, set in a mountain village long ago. In that village, there lived a woman who was visited, again and again, by a heavy sorrow. It would arrive without warning, often in the evening, and knock at her door. And each time it came, she did everything she could to keep it out. She barred the door and pressed her back against it. She covered her ears so as not to hear the knocking. She lit every lamp in the house and busied herself with 100 small tasks, hoping that if she ignored the visitor long enough, it would give up and go away. But it never did. The sorrow would wait outside her door all night, knocking, and she would lie awake on the other side, exhausted from holding the door shut, until by morning she was more worn out than the sorrow itself. And the strange thing was that the harder she fought to keep it out, the longer it seemed to stay. Some nights, it would linger for days, and she grew thin and weary from the endless effort of barring her door against it. At last, worn down, she walked up the hill to the hut of an old teacher who lived above the village, a woman said to have a peaceful heart. She told her everything, how the sorrow came, how she fought it, how it would not leave. The old teacher listened and poured 2 cups of tea and was quiet for a while. Then she said something the woman did not expect. "The next time your visitor knocks," she said, "do not bar the door. Open it. Invite the sorrow in. Offer it a seat by the fire and pour it a cup of tea and simply sit with it as you would sit with any tired traveler who had come a long way. You need not entertain it. You need not do anything at all. Only let it be here and keep it company until it is ready to go." The woman was afraid. To open the door to the very thing she had spent so long keeping out seemed the most frightening thing in the world. But she was too tired to keep fighting, and so that evening, when the familiar knock came, she did as the teacher had said. With trembling hands, she opened the door, and there stood the sorrow, smaller than she had imagined, and warier than she had imagined, looking almost relieved to be asked in at last. She set a chair for it by the fire. She poured it a cup of tea, and then she sat beside it, and did not fight, and did not flee, and let it simply be there with her, in the warm light. And a remarkable thing happened. The sorrow, no longer met with a barred door, began to ease. It sat with her quietly for a time, and was not nearly so terrible up close as it had seemed through the locked door. And after a while, having been received instead of resisted, it rose and thanked her and went gently on its way. It still returned from time to time, for that is the way of sorrows. But the woman was never again afraid of the knock at her door. She had learned that what asked to come in had only ever wanted to be received, and that once welcomed, it would always, in time, move on. There is a wisdom in that old story that many of us spend years learning. The woman discovered, as we all must, that the feeling at her door was never an enemy to be shut out. It was a tired traveler that had only come to be received. And what no bolted door could accomplish, a cup of tea and a seat by the fire could. So it is with our own difficult feelings. The sorrow that arrives unbidden, the worry that knocks in the night, the hurt that will not seem to leave, these are not enemies. They are the visitor in the old story, and each of them, if we meet it instead of fleeing it, turns out to be far less fearsome up close, and to be asking only to be let in. When we stop fighting these feelings and turn toward them with a welcoming heart, something unexpected happens. The very feeling we believed we could not bear begins to ease. It was never asking to be defeated. It was only asking to be received. The Buddha taught that hatred is never ended by hatred, that anger is never healed by more anger, and that only love can finally heal what troubles us. We tend to hear this as a teaching about how to treat other people, and it is. But it is just as true of how we treat the difficult things inside ourselves. We cannot hate our own sorrow into leaving. We cannot bar the door against our own fear and expect it to give up and go. The fighting only keeps it waiting on the doorstep. It is only the open door, only the turning toward our own troubled heart with tenderness that allows the feeling, at last, to be received and then to move on. Imagine someone lying awake at night, visited by a wave of worry. The old way is to fight it, to lie there arguing with the fear, growing cross at oneself for being so unsettled, until both the worry and the weariness have only grown. But there is another way to meet that visitor in the night, to soften toward it as toward a child who has woken from a bad dream, to rest a hand on one's own unsettled heart and say, inwardly, I know you are afraid. I am here, not ordering the fear to leave, not pretending it is not there, only keeping it company, with warmth, until it quiets on its own, and the breathing slows, and the feeling, having been received rather than fought, gently passes. This asks nothing heroic of us. It asks only that we be kind to the frightened thing within, instead of adding our own struggle to its fear. This way of meeting our feelings runs against everything we are usually taught. We are taught to be strong, to master our emotions, to push down what is difficult and carry on. And so when a hard feeling arrives, we go to war with it. We tell ourselves we should not feel this way. We try to crush it, to argue it away, to overpower it with willpower. And like the woman holding her door shut through the night, we exhaust ourselves in a struggle that cannot be won that way. In Zen, there is a spirit of welcoming whatever arises, of bowing to each thing as it comes, even the unwelcome guest. The feeling we fight does not leave. It waits at the door. It presses harder the harder it is refused, just as the woman's sorrow lingered longest on the nights she fought it most. But the feeling that is met with a welcoming awareness, that is allowed simply to be here, received with kindness, begins to settle on its own. A grief that is finally allowed to be grieved can move through us and complete itself. An anger that is met with understanding, rather than either exploded outward or crushed down, begins to reveal the hurt or the fear beneath it, and as that is tended, the anger loses its heat. To turn toward a hard feeling with tenderness, we might simply acknowledge it, as we would acknowledge a tired traveler arriving at the door. We do not have to fix it or make it go away. We need only be willing to sit with it, to let it be here, to receive it with the warmth of an open door, rather than the resistance of a bolted one. And in being met this way, the feeling, like the visitor in the story, grows calmer and eases, and in time takes its leave of its own accord. It helps to remember that a feeling, however vast, is not the whole of us. We are the sky, and the feeling is the weather moving across it. A storm can fill the entire sky for a time, dark and thunderous, and still the sky itself is never harmed by the storm, and remains when the storm has passed. When we meet a great feeling with the spaciousness of awareness, we are remembering that we are the sky and not only the storm. The grief is real, and it is allowed to rage and pour. But there is something in us larger than the grief, something that can hold it, the way the sky holds the weather, without being torn apart. There is one more piece to this story that is easy to miss. The woman did not make herself larger than her sorrow, nor did she make the sorrow smaller. She simply became more welcoming than she was afraid. Her willingness to open the door was wider than her fear of what stood behind it. And this is the secret of meeting our own hardest feelings. We do not need to be stronger than our grief or our fear. We need only bring to it a kindness that is wider than the feeling itself, a spaciousness of heart that can hold even a great sorrow without being overwhelmed by it. This is why those who have suffered greatly and met their suffering with an open heart so often become the gentlest and most compassionate among us. They have opened the door to their own sorrow. They have learned that they could sit with the very thing they feared and not be destroyed by it. and come out softened rather than broken. And having learned this for themselves, they carry a tenderness toward all the frightened, suffering hearts around them, knowing that beneath every fear is something that only longs to be received. Stay here a moment longer. Whatever you are carrying may simply remain, welcomed, asking nothing of you. We will continue whenever you feel ready. There is a kind of love that does not wait to be deserved. It does not ask what someone has accomplished, or whether they have been good enough, or whether they have earned a place in our hearts. It simply wishes them well, the way one might wish warmth to a stranger passing in the cold. In the Buddhist tradition, this love has a name. It is called metta, often translated as loving kindness, and it is considered one of the most healing forces a human heart can learn to offer. What makes this love so remarkable is how wide it reaches. It begins close to home, with those we already cherish, and then it widens, slowly, to include people we hardly know, and then even those we find difficult, and at last all living things everywhere, without exception. It is a love with no edges, a warmth that leaves no one outside. There is something quietly revolutionary in this. We are used to a love that is earned and exchanged, given to those who give to us, withheld from those who have wronged us. But the love the Buddha pointed to asks for nothing in return and sets no conditions. It is closer to the warmth of the sun, which falls on everyone alike, the kind and the unkind, the grateful and the indifferent, without choosing. To wish another person well, simply because they too know what it is to suffer and to long for happiness, is to step outside the endless bookkeeping of who deserves what and into a freedom that turns out to be its own deep reward. And there is one person this love must include who is, for many of us, the very hardest to reach: ourselves. Most of us find it far easier to offer kindness outward than to turn it inward. We can be endlessly patient with a friend who is struggling and merciless with ourselves for the very same struggle. We forgive others their stumbles and hold our own against ourselves for years. There is a strange imbalance in the human heart, a generosity that flows freely in every direction but one. The Buddha saw this clearly, and the practice of loving kindness he taught was never meant to stop at the edge of our own skin. In the traditional way of offering metta, a person begins by turning the good wishes toward themselves before extending them outward to others. May I be happy. May I be at peace. May I be free from suffering. Only then do the wishes widen to include loved ones, strangers, and at last all beings. The self is not an afterthought in this love. It is where the love begins. This is not selfishness. It is the opposite of selfishness. For the kindness we manage to offer ourselves does not stay locked inside us. It overflows. A person who has learned to meet their own pain with tenderness becomes far more able to meet the pain of others that way too. The warmth we extend inward becomes the warmth we have to give. A heart that is itself well tended has something to offer, while a heart starved of its own kindness slowly empties until there is nothing left to share. Let us explore a story about this turning of kindness inward, set in a monastery long ago. There was once a woman who came to stay at a place of retreat in the mountains, hoping to find some peace. She had spent her whole life caring for others, tending to everyone around her, always putting herself last. She was known by all who knew her as the kindest of souls. And yet she had arrived at the retreat exhausted in a way that sleep could not mend, hollowed out, with nothing left to give. She could not understand it. She had done everything right. She had given everything she had. She went to the teacher who guided the retreat, an old monk with a calm and friendly manner, and she told him of her tiredness. She expected him to praise her devotion, or to tell her to rest a few days and then return to her giving. Instead, he asked her a single question. In all these years of caring for everyone around you, he said, have you ever once offered that same care to yourself? The woman did not know how to answer. The question seemed almost to make no sense to her. Care for herself? There had never been time. There had always been someone else who needed her more. And as she sat with the question, she began, to her own surprise, to weep. For she saw that in a lifetime of boundless kindness, she had left one person out entirely. She had been a wellspring of love for all the world, and a stranger to her own heart. The old monk taught her, in the days that followed, a simple practice of turning her good wishes toward herself, the same wishes she had spent her life offering everyone else. May I be well. May I be at peace. May I be held as gently as I have tried to hold others. At first it felt awkward and undeserved, almost wrong. But slowly, something in her that had been parched for a very long time began to drink. The hollowness began to fill. And as it filled, she discovered something that astonished her. Her love for others did not shrink when she included herself in it. It grew. It became deeper and steadier and no longer left her empty, because now it flowed from a heart that was itself being tended. What the woman discovered is the secret hidden in this whole teaching. We tend to imagine that we must choose, that we can be either the one who gives care or the one who receives it, the holder or the held. But the deepest truth is that we are meant to be both. We are meant to hold others, yes, with all the warmth we can offer. And we are meant, at the very same time, to be held, including by our own kindness, so that the holding never empties us out. To become the holder and the held is to close the circle of love so that it flows without end. The care we give to others returns to us through the care we give ourselves, and the care we give ourselves overflows again into the care we have for others, around and around, a current that never runs dry because it is always being replenished. And we are not only held by our own kindness, we are held too by the love of others, by the company of those who walk beside us, by the great compassion that the traditions speak of, by the simple steadiness of the earth beneath us, and the breath that comes and goes without our asking. Much of our weariness comes from the belief that we must do all the holding ourselves, that we must be strong without ever being supported. But a life is not lived that way. We are held 1,000 times a day by things we never notice, and to let ourselves feel that holding, to lean into it rather than bracing against it, is itself a kind of rest. The one who knows how to be held becomes, in turn, far better at holding others, because they are no longer running on empty, no longer giving from a place of depletion, but from a fullness that is continually renewed. There is an image that captures this beautifully. Imagine a single drop of dye placed into a small cup of water. It colors the whole cup at once, strong and dark, because the space is so small. Now imagine that same drop placed into a wide, clear lake. It disappears, swallowed up in all that spaciousness, leaving the water clear. So it is with a difficult feeling and with a difficult day When our hearts are small and tight, a single sorrow can color everything, the way the dye darkens the little cup. But when we have learned to rest in the spaciousness of a kind and open heart, that same sorrow has room to dissolve. It is still there, but it no longer overwhelms, because it is held in something so much larger than itself. This spaciousness is what loving kindness builds in us. Not a heart that never hurts, but a heart so wide and well tended that its hurts have room to soften and settle, held in an ocean of warmth rather than trapped in a thimble of fear. Zen often speaks of a mind as wide and clear as the open sky, or as a still mirror that reflects whatever passes before it without grasping or pushing anything away. This is the same spaciousness. A heart that has room for everything, that meets each thing that arises, joy or sorrow, with the same open welcome, and is not thrown about by any of it. We do not arrive at such a heart by force. It grows, gently, each time we choose kindness over harshness, each time we make a little more room inside ourselves for what is difficult, until the room becomes vast, and almost nothing can crowd it. There is a practice at the heart of the Buddhist tradition that gives this its fullest form. In it, a person breathes in the suffering of the world, taking it into a heart spacious enough to hold it, and breathes out warmth and ease and relief in return. It sounds, at first, like a strange thing to do, to breathe in suffering on purpose. But those who practice it find that it does not burden the heart. It expands it. With each breath, the heart becomes a little more able to be present with pain, its own and the world's, and to answer that pain with kindness rather than fear. We do not need any formal practice to begin, though. We need only to remember, in the ordinary moments of a day, that we can be both the one who holds and the one who is held. When we are weary, we can turn to ourselves the same gentleness we would turn to a tired friend. When another is suffering, we can offer them our warmth, knowing that in the offering we ourselves are warmed. The heart was made to give and to receive, and it is whole only when it does both. So may the kindness we so readily offer the world finally include the one who offers it. May we learn to be as patient with ourselves as we are with those we love. And may we discover, as the woman in the mountains did, that a heart which holds itself with tenderness does not love others less, but immeasurably more, having become at last a wellspring that never runs dry. Let us pause here together for a moment. May you be well. May you be at peace. And when you are ready, we will continue on. We have traveled a long way together. We began by remembering who we are in our best moments, and we have wandered since through fear and tenderness, through the courage to stay present, through the kindness we so often forget to turn upon ourselves. And now we come to the close, which is not really an ending but a kind of gathering, a drawing together of everything we have touched along the way. Along this path we have met many things: the small and frightened self, and the larger life it forgets it belongs to, the fear that hides beneath so much of what we do, and the tenderness that waits beneath the fear. We have learned that what we turn toward with kindness can soften and pass, and that what we run from only follows us. We have seen that we need not carry our burdens alone, and that the love we give the world is meant to include the one who gives it. Each teaching was a different doorway, but every doorway opened onto the same room. For all of these teachings, in the end, point toward a single thing. They point us home. Home to the larger life we belong to, home to the open heart beneath our fear, home to one another. The whole journey has been, in a sense, a long remembering of something we already knew deep down before we ever set out. There is an old Zen story that holds this perfectly, and it has been told for many centuries. A man went searching far and wide for his ox. It had wandered off, he believed, and was lost somewhere in the hills, and so he set out to find it. He searched through forests and along rivers. He climbed mountains and crossed valleys. He asked everyone he met whether they had seen his missing ox. For a long time he found nothing and grew weary and discouraged, certain the ox was gone for good. But the truth, which he came to see only slowly, was that the ox had never been lost at all. In his searching, he had simply overlooked what was nearest to him. And in the end, he came to understand that the very ox he had been seeking across all those miles had been carrying him the whole time. He had been riding it all along. This is one of the oldest teachings there is. What we go searching for, so often, is the very thing we already have. We look everywhere for peace, for belonging, for our own true nature, certain it lies somewhere we have not yet reached, in some teaching we have not yet learned, in some place we have not yet traveled. And all the while, the thing we seek is carrying us. It was never lost. We had only forgotten to notice it, right here, beneath us, closer than our own breath. How much of a life is spent in that searching? We tell ourselves we will be at peace once we have reached the next thing, solved the next problem, become a little different than we are. And when we arrive, the peace is not there, for it was never waiting at the destination. It was the still ground beneath all our striving, available in any moment. We grew quiet enough to feel it. The man did not need to find his ox. He needed only to notice that he was already riding it. And we do not need to journey anywhere to find what we have been seeking. We need only to pause and grow still and remember what was carrying us all along. So everything we have spoken of has not been about acquiring something new. It has been about remembering something old. The peace was always here. The open heart was always here. The belonging to a larger whole was never something we had to earn or build. It was the ground we were standing on the entire time. We had simply forgotten, for a little while, how much larger we are than the small and separate self we took ourselves to be. The Buddha, near the end of his life, is said to have left his students with a few simple words. "Be a light unto yourselves," he told them. He did not say to depend forever on him or on any teacher. He pointed them back to what they already carried within. The light they needed was not somewhere outside, in him or in his teaching alone. It was already lit within each of them, waiting only to be remembered. And yet, though the light is within us, we are not meant to carry it alone. This is the last and perhaps the gentlest of all the teachings. We need one another. We are held and we hold in return, and the journey is meant to be shared. There is a beautiful image of an old wooden water wheel beside a flowing river. The wheel sits in the current, and as the water comes to it, it does not clutch the water or try to hold on. It receives each cupful, lets the weight of it turn the wheel, and then pours it out again below and turns to receive the next. In this way, the wheel is always full and always emptying, always receiving and always giving, and because of this it never stops turning, and the water it lifts goes on to nourish the fields beyond. A heart can live like that water wheel, It receives the love and the life that come to it, lets them move through, and gives them onward, and in the giving, makes room to receive again. A wheel that tried to grasp and keep the water would soon grow heavy and motionless. It is only the constant flow, the receiving and the giving both, that keeps it turning and keeps it alive. And so it is with us. We take in the kindness of others and the gifts of each day, and we let them move through us and out into the world. And in that endless turning, we are nourished, and we nourish, and nothing is ever used up. None of what we have spoken of lives in grand moments. It lives in small ones. It lives in the pause we take before answering sharply, in the breath we draw when a hard feeling arrives, in the moment we choose to be gentle with ourselves rather than harsh. It lives in the willingness to let someone help us, and in the small kindness we offer a stranger. These teachings are not meant to be kept on a high shelf and admired. They are meant to be lived quietly in the ordinary hours where almost no one will see, and we will forget them. Let that be said plainly. We will return to our old habits, our fear, our hurry, our harshness, again and again. This is not failure. It is simply being human. The whole of this path is a remembering, and remembering is something we do not once, but 1,000 times, returning whenever we notice we have wandered to what we know in our deepest heart to be true. Each return is enough. We do not have to hold the thread perfectly. We have only to take it up again, kindly, each time it slips from our hands. This is why, of all the things that might be said in closing, the simplest may be the truest. Stay together. Lean on one another. Let us allow ourselves to be held when we are weary, and hold others when they are. None of us was ever meant to walk the whole way alone, and the path is warmer and far more possible when we walk it side by side. The Buddhist tradition has always known this. It speaks of awakening not as a solitary achievement, but as something we move toward together, supported by those who walk before us, beside us, and after us. We are like travelers on a long road at night, each carrying a small lantern. Alone, each light is faint. But when we walk close together, the many small lights become one warm glow, and the road ahead grows clear, and no one has to find their way in the dark. There are 3 things, the old teaching says, that we can always lean on when our own strength runs low. The example of those who have walked this way before us and found peace, showing us that it can be done. The wisdom they left behind, like a lamp passed hand to hand across the centuries, lighting our way. And the simple companionship of fellow travelers, those walking beside us now, who understand because they are carrying their own lanterns through the same dark. These are not distant or lofty things. They are as near as a remembered story, a few wise words recalled at the right moment, a friend who sits with us when the night feels long. Whenever we feel we cannot go on alone, we can remember that we are not alone and never have been. So much is holding us, if only we will let ourselves feel it. So, as we come to rest at the end of this journey, let us carry a few simple things with us. That we are larger than our fear. That our tender hearts are not a weakness but the very best of us. That the difficult feelings we meet with kindness will soften and pass. That we ourselves deserve the same gentleness we so freely give to others. And that we are not, and never were, alone. Whatever brought any of us here, whatever we are carrying, may it rest a little easier now. May we remember, in the quiet that follows, who we have always been beneath it all. And may we know, wherever we find ourselves, that we belong to something vast and warm and unbreakable, and that we are held. Stay together, friends. May we be a light unto ourselves and to one another. And may we rest now, knowing that the peace we have been seeking was, all along, already here. Let us rest here together for one last moment. Let everything be just as it is, nothing to do, nowhere to be. And when you are ready, we will move gently toward our close. And so we come to the end of our time together tonight. There is nothing left to do now. Nothing to understand, nothing to remember, nothing to hold on to. Everything that was offered tonight has already done its quiet work, whether or not the thinking mind recalls a single word of it. The heart hears what it needs to hear, in its own way, and keeps it. So there is no need to grasp after any of it. It is already yours. There is something about wisdom that the Zen tradition understood well, and that is easy to miss. It is not gathered the way we gather facts, stored up and counted and kept. It is more like water sinking into dry earth. We do not see where it goes, and we cannot point to it afterward, and yet the ground is changed by it, made ready to bring forth something living when the season turns. The truest things we learn are like this. They disappear into us, and we forget we ever heard them, and then one day, in the middle of an ordinary trouble, they rise up from somewhere within and meet us exactly when we need them. So if tonight feels already half forgotten, that is no loss. What matters has gone where it needed to go. There is an old image from the East that the mind is like a pool of water. When the water is stirred up, churned by wind and movement, it grows cloudy, and we cannot see down into it at all. The mud rises and swirls, and everything becomes murky and dim. And there is a great temptation, when the water is cloudy, to reach in and try to fix it, to grab at the mud, to stir it this way and that in an effort to make it clear. But anyone who has tried this knows it only makes the water cloudier still. The water does not become clear by our effort. It becomes clear by being left alone. When the pool is allowed simply to be still, undisturbed, the mud settles of its own accord, sinking slowly to the bottom, and the water clears all on its own, until at last we can see straight down to the very bottom, as if through glass. We do not have to do anything. We have only to stop stirring and let the stillness do what stillness does. So it is with a troubled mind at the end of a long day. All our turning over of the day's worries, all our churning and fretting and trying to think our way to peace only stirs the water further. The clearing does not come from more effort. It comes from rest, from letting the thoughts settle, untouched, until the mind grows clear of its own accord. There is nothing to fix tonight. We have only to be still and let the mud of the day sink slowly to the bottom and find that clarity was waiting beneath it all along. Tonight, we remembered a few simple things. That we are so much larger than the small and frightened self we sometimes take ourselves to be. That our tender hearts, the part of us that can be touched and moved and hurt, are not a weakness to be armored over, but the very best and most alive part of us. We remembered that the difficult feelings we so often run from will, when we finally turn and meet them with a little kindness, soften and ease and move through us, as all things do. and we remembered that we were never meant to walk through any of it alone. These are not things to be studied. There is no test in the morning. They are things to be lived, slowly, over a whole life, and forgotten, and remembered again, 1,000 times. So if tomorrow the old worries return, and the old hurry, and the old harshness, let there be no blame in it. That is simply what it is to be human. The Buddhist path has never asked for perfection. It asks only for return, the gentle turning back, again and again, to what we know in our deepest heart to be true. We lose the thread, and we take it up again. We forget who we are, and then, in some still moment, we remember. And each remembering is enough. There is a saying in Zen that the obstacle is the path. We tend to wait for life to grow calm before we can be at peace, certain that our peace lies on the far side of our troubles, once they are finally solved. But the troubles are never finally solved, not in any life, and the peace was never waiting on the far side of them. It is found in the meeting of them, here, in the middle of the unfinished and imperfect days that are the only days we are ever given. The Buddha did not teach a way to escape the world. He taught a way to be wholly within it, awake and tender and unafraid, exactly as it is. Whatever the day asked of us, whatever it took from us, it is finished now, and it was never the whole of who we are. We tend to mistake a hard day for a hard life, a passing mood for a permanent truth, a single failure for the measure of ourselves. But the Buddha taught that all things are passing, that nothing we cling to and nothing we dread will stay, and there is a great mercy hidden in this. The worries that loom so large tonight will look smaller by morning, and smaller still in a month, and one day we will not remember them at all. They are weather moving through. We do not have to settle anything tonight, or solve anything, or carry anything forward. The day can be set down simply by understanding that it was only a day, one of the many thousands of an ordinary life, and that none of them, however hard, was ever the truth of us. What we are runs deeper than any single day could reach. There is an old story that has been told in many lands about a ruler who once gathered his wisest counselors and gave them a curious task. He asked them to find for him some single thing, some words that would be true in every season of a life. Words that would steady him when he was high with triumph and lift him when he was low with sorrow. The counselors went away and thought for a long time, and at last they returned with a plain ring, and inside it they had engraved a few small words. The ruler read them, and from that day he wore the ring always, and it is said that those words carried him through every fortune and every grief that came to him. The words were simply these: "This too shall pass." When his armies won, and the whole city rejoiced, and he felt himself the greatest of men, he would look at the ring and read the words and remember not to be carried away, for this too would pass. And when his plans crumbled and those he loved were taken from him and the nights were long and bitter, he would look at the ring and read the same words and find a strange comfort in them, for this sorrow too, however bottomless it seemed, would one day pass. Both the joy and the grief were guests, arriving and departing, and neither was the whole of his life. To know this did not make him cold. It made him free. He could taste his joys fully, without clutching at them, and bear his sorrows gently, without drowning in them, because he knew that all of it was always, quietly, on its way somewhere else. So whatever weighs on the heart tonight, it too is passing, even now, even as we rest. Nothing is being asked of us but to let it move, in its own time, the way all things move. There is another old story, told long ago about a man crossing a wide river alone in a small boat in the early morning mist. He was rowing along, lost in his own thoughts, when he felt a sudden bump and looked up to see another boat drifting straight toward him, about to strike his own. He felt anger rise at once. Who was this careless boatman, not watching where he was going, disturbing his peaceful crossing? He opened his mouth to shout at the fool to steer away. But as the other boat came close through the mist, he saw that it was empty. It had simply slipped its mooring somewhere upstream and was drifting down the current on its own, with no one in it at all. And in that instant, his anger vanished completely. There was no one to be angry at. The boat bumped against his and drifted on, and he was left in the stillness of the morning, his irritation gone as quickly as it had come, a little amazed at himself. And here is what the story gently shows. Nothing had changed about the bump itself, about the event. The only thing that changed was the man's understanding. When he believed there was a careless person to blame, his anger flared. When he saw the boat was empty, the same event could not trouble him at all. So much of what disturbs us is like this. We fill the empty boats of our days with imagined offenders, with stories of who wronged us and why, and it is these stories, far more than the events themselves, that trouble our hearts. The driver who cut ahead, the friend who did not call, the sharp word from someone tired. So often the boat that bumped us was, in its way, empty. The other was simply caught in their own current, their own troubles, their own fear, no more aiming at us than a drifting boat aims at anything. To see this is to feel the anger drain away, and to meet the day's small collisions with peace instead of blame. So let us let the empty boats of this day drift on by. Whatever bumped against us today, whatever we are still a little sore about, we can loosen our grip on the story of it now and let it float away downstream into the mist and trouble us no further. And perhaps this is the deepest understanding of all, that the life we have been waiting to begin is the life we are already living. That the peace we have been searching for is not a destination we will one day reach, but the ground beneath our feet, available in any moment we grow quiet enough to feel it. We spend so much of ourselves reaching for what is to come, and so little simply resting in what is already here. Yet here is the only place peace has ever been found, and now is the only time anyone has ever found it. The whole of the path, in the end, is the slow learning to stop running, to stop reaching, to arrive at last in our own life, and to find that the thing we chased so far and so long was never further than the present moment, waiting patiently for us to turn and notice it. There is a story from the old Zen tradition about a young seeker who arrived one morning at a monastery full of eagerness, certain that the master there held some great secret that would change everything. He had traveled far. He had given up much. He bowed before the old teacher and said, "I have come a long way to learn the deepest truth. Please, teach me the way to awakening." The old monk looked at him kindly and asked, "Have you eaten your morning meal?" The young man was surprised by the question, but he answered that yes, he had eaten. "Then," said the old monk, "go and wash your bowl." And in that small and ordinary instruction, something opened in the young seeker. He had come expecting some grand and hidden teaching, some secret kept only for the worthy. And what the master gave him instead was this, that the truth he was chasing was not waiting at the end of some far and difficult road. It was here, in the simple acts of an ordinary morning, in eating when it is time to eat, in washing the bowl when the meal is done, in doing with a whole and present heart the plain and humble thing that is in front of us right now. The awakening he sought was not somewhere else. It was in the washing of the bowl, if only he would be fully there for it. This is the simple secret the tradition returns to again and again. We imagine that peace and meaning live in some special place we have not yet reached, some achievement, some far-off calm. But they have been hidden, all along, in the most ordinary moments of our days, waiting only for us to arrive and meet them. The whole of a life is made of small and simple moments, like the washing of a bowl, and each one, met with a present heart, is already complete. There is a story that captures this, told of a fisherman in a small seaside village long ago. He lived simply. Each morning, he would take his small boat out for a few hours and catch just enough fish for his family, and then he would return to shore and spend the long afternoon resting in the shade, playing with his children, walking with his wife along the water, and sitting with his friends in the evening as the sun went down over the sea. His days were unhurried and full of small contentments. One day a visitor from the great city came to the village, a man of business, clever and full of plans. He watched the fisherman come in early with his modest catch and could not understand it. "Why do you come in so soon?" he asked. "You could stay out all day and catch far more fish." The fisherman asked what he would do with more fish. "Why, you would sell them and earn more money," said the visitor. "With that, you could buy a bigger boat and catch more still. Soon you could buy several boats and hire others to fish for you. In a few years you would have a whole fleet. You could leave this little village, move to the city, and run a great enterprise." "And then?" asked the fisherman. "And then," said the visitor, growing excited, "once you had built it all up over many years, you could sell the company for a great fortune and become very rich indeed." "And then?" the fisherman asked again. The visitor paused. "Why then," he said, "you could finally retire. You could move to a small village by the sea and take your boat out for just a few hours each morning and spend your afternoons resting in the shade and playing with your children, and your evenings with your wife and your friends, watching the sun go down over the water." The fisherman smiled, for that was the life he was already living. He had arrived, without all the striving, at the very place the visitor hoped to reach only at the end of a long and effortful road. And this is so often how it is with the peace we chase. We believe we must labor for years to earn our way to it, when all the while it has been quietly available, here, in the simple and unhurried living of an ordinary day. So tonight there is nowhere to get to. Nothing to build, nothing to earn, no long road still to travel before rest is allowed. The peace is here, in this very moment, freely given, asking only that we stop long enough to receive it. So may you carry these things lightly into the days ahead. May you be patient with yourself and patient with the slow unfolding of a human life. May you meet your own heart and the hearts of others with a little more tenderness than the world tends to show. And may you remember, when the nights are long, that you belong to something vast and warm and unbreakable, that you are not alone, and that the peace you have been searching for was, all along, already here, closer than your own breath. Thank you for spending this time here tonight. Thank you for the simple courage it takes to be still, to be kind toward yourself, to turn toward your own heart and remember who you are. It is no small thing. In a world that rarely slows down, the choice to sit still and listen for what is true is itself a quiet act of wisdom, and the world is a little warmer for every heart that makes it. Until we meet again, be gentle with yourself and with one another. Stay close to what matters. Let the world be a little softer for your having moved through it kindly. And remember always that you are held. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk.